Welcome, Colette Rosemary Boring here of Penny Slate Designs, home of patented press and peel patterns, the fun way to complete fusible applique. In this video, number 3, I share machine settings and demonstrate techniques that give beautiful results every time. So stay tuned. Okay, so the first setting that we're going to do and change is the lowering the pressure on the presser foot. So on my Viking number 1 Plus, which is an older machine, you can see right here on the side of the machine there is a dial. A lot of machines will have the button. There may be a button right up here on top. Look at your owner's manual to find out if you're able to do that and where that setting would be. Now I'm going to change my pressure on the presser foot from number 6 to about maybe a 1.5 or 2. This is a setting, this can be lowered because this machine has the capability of doing embroidery. I'm going to make on my machine, this is my upper thread tension dial, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that down to about a 1.5 or a 2 also. Those are the two suggestions that I have for the setting. Okay, on here we are again. There's a couple other considerations and things that I want you to think about, namely the weight of your thread and the thickness of your needle. Threads, I hope this isn't too redundant for any of you, but I use all kinds of threads, and thread can go from, the higher the number of your thread, the thinner the diameter of it is. There is a 100 weight. This you can barely see it. Here's a 40 weight rayon. You go to 30 weight and you can see you're able to see them a lot more clearly as they get thicker. So I want you to consider if your applique piece is very delicate and has a lot of small pieces in it, you're going to want to use a thinner needle and a finer thread. Just be sure that when you're sewing along the edges of your piece that you're not ending up with some big holes on the side and it ends up chewing up the applique piece, because some of the things that I do are kind of small and you just want to be mindful of that. This is the last thing that we're going to talk about before we get started. I want to talk to you about your ironing surface. If you're using a general purpose ironing board, there's usually a lot of give and spring to it. You want to be able to press your items down, and this goes for patchwork too, that you want to be able to press your items on a hard, flat, lightly cushioned table. This is just one layer of thin batting and the Thermobond fabric. Okay, speaking of ironing surfaces, while I'm here, I'm going to prepare my piece, and I do so by, I use a starch or a starch alternative to give my applique piece some body. The floppier it is, the harder it's going to be to work with. And if you're like me, you can never sit and start and finish one project, and they usually end up getting bounced around a little bit. So it's always good to, I put a little bit on, let it soak a minute, and then go ahead and use your iron to get it all in there very well. Okay, you can see from the display here that I have different types of Skemetz needles. Depending on, sometimes my machine gets a little fussy and it's going to want one kind of needle or another. I range from, you can see the universals range from 12 to 14. Those are larger. This is the smallest one that I see. It's a number 8, and that can be used for very fine work, very fine threads. You can go to a Microtex number 10, and sometimes I'll go up to a 14 depending on how big my piece is and how thick the thread is that I'm using. You could also, what I would do is go to your local quilt shop. Remember to support your local quilt shops and ask them about which you know, ask them to educate you on your thread weights and your needle sizes. It makes a huge difference. So before I get ready to sew, I'm going to just do a test run on the side. You can do it on a scrap fabric if you want, but just make sure that it has everything identical to your piece. And I just run a test run just to make sure that it's the width that I want it to be, and each stitch is the length is what I want it to be. It needs to work with the piece that you're appliquing. That one looks pretty good, and I think I'll go with that. My sweet spot on my machine is the width is a 1.5 or 1, and the length is 1 or 0.5. Those are the settings that I usually like to use. You will find what works for you and what you're very comfortable with. Okay, now what you might need to remember when you're stitching is that you're going to do the pieces that lay down first in number order. When you're doing press and peel, they're all assembled in number order, so that's easy to know. And if you're looking at this piece right here, if you could see, let me see if I can't zoom in a little bit carefully for you. You can see that this piece lays lower than it's on the bottom of these two, so that's where we're going to go. I think that's a very good spot right there. Oh yeah. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my presser foot down. I'm going to make sure that my top thread is where I want it to be. And I'm going to make sure that my needle is going to start on the right. I don't know why I'm like that, but I always like it to start on the right, because then I can anchor it right on the edge of the fabric, and I'll show you what I mean by that. You see right there. That's where I want to start. Okay, another thing is that as you're stitching, as that needle goes back, I want you to make sure that when it lands on the right hand side, that it's landing right on the edge of the fabric. That's what you want it to do. And that's why we lowered the top tension on our thread, because we don't want it to poke through the edge. Alright, so here we go. 1. Now you see how I'm able to move my piece? The reason that I'm able to do that is because I lowered the pressure on my presser foot. I'm able to manipulate without stretching the fabric. Now I want you to look carefully at, you'll see right here, the question is, when do I pivot? We all have to, but when? Alright, so you'll see this piece right here is starting to go off in a different direction. What I want to do at this point is I just want to put a slight pivot on it so that it is in line with the line of stitching that I'm about to do. I don't want to stretch my fabric at all. Okay, now we're getting ready for a point, and I like to set my needle in the down position for this. Alright, now I have gone to the very edge. I'm going to pivot slightly, and what I want to happen is I want that thread to go from the point to this hole where it just came from. The best thing to do is to be able to go into that hole like 3 times. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. There we go. Now when I'm pivoting, when I want to go on, I don't know, it's hard to describe it, but when I'm pivoting, I don't want to leave a gap on the outside. So what I do is I pivot and turn and go in that way. I would rather have the gap where the fabric is on the fabric side than have it on the outside, if that makes any sense. And you can see when that needle's landing down on the right, it's going right along the edge of the fabric. Okay, what I want to do is I'm going to stop with that needle right in that very point, which is right there. I think I can do one more. Right there. Okay, now I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to do one, and I'm going to go back, just like I did on the other point, the convex point. There we go. Right back in that hole again. You see that? Okay, now we're getting ready for another convex point. This one isn't so pointy, which is kind of easy, so we're going to kind of square this one up. Okay, now we pivot, and off we go. Okay, we're getting ready for a concave point. I'm going to stop, slow down a little bit, and get that sweet spot. Okay, now I'm going to pivot. Go back, and see how it landed right back in that same hole? That's exactly what you want it to do. Okay, when I approach something like a point or a sharp curve, I always slow down. I use that maneuverability as far as I can before I have to lift up that presser foot and pivot. Okay, now I have to pivot. I'm going to go back in that hole, pivot just a little bit more, go again. Now I'm ready. Off I go. You see, lowering the pressure on the presser foot allows you to manipulate without having to pivot so much. It just loosens everything up. Okay, now I don't want to leave gaps, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot and just go along so that line of stitching stops right near the new edge. Needle up, pull out. I always stop with my fabric, with my thread on top. I'm going to pull it to the back rather. Okay. And there you have it. A very nicely stitched piece. Well, I hope you enjoyed the demonstration on the stitching. Remember to pay attention to the thickness of your needle, the weight of your thread. You want to lower the pressure on the presser foot if you can. If you can't, you're just going to have to pivot more often, but you can still do beautiful work. You also want to lower the tension on your top thread. And if you have any questions or comments about this video, please send them to coboring, C-O-B-O-R-I-N-G, @kerlake.com.